Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission here, well, it's pretty simple. We take these complex sources, we cut through the noise, and we really try to deliver the crucial knowledge, maybe some surprising context too, that you need to get to the heart of the material. Today, we are immersing ourselves, really diving deep into the life of a figure whose name alone just resonates through history. Gaius Julius Caesar lived 100 BC to 44 BC.
That's right. And when we talk Caesar, it's not just, reading a life story. It's more like analyzing this incredible fusion of, hard historical fact. You've got the military records, the offices he held, the actual laws, alongside this almost mythic status, right? Cemented by drama, like Shakespeare.
Yeah, the play is huge.
Huge. So our goal here is to really pull out that narrative spine, to understand not just what he did, but how his ambition, his drive led to these huge reforms, massive conflict, and ultimately that shattering assassination that basically guaranteed the end of the Roman Republic.
And the core tension, it's just fascinating, isn't it? You have this brilliant general, incredibly sharp politically, who manages to gather so much personal power just concentrated in himself.
Unprecedented power.
That his opponents, these powerful figures in their own right, they felt the only way out was violence, brutal conspiratorial violence. So we need to figure out how he achieved that level of dominance, and crucially, how that violence, which is meant to save the Republic, actually sealed its fate and paved the way for the empire. Okay, let's try and unpack this monumental figure.
So Caesar, he's born into the gens, Julia.
Yeah.
That's one of Rome's really old patrician families.
Yeah.
And the political messaging just baked into that lineage was massive.
How so? What did they claim?
They claimed direct descent from Aeolus, the mythical founder of the Roman race, son of Aeneas.
Right, the Trojan hero.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And ultimately trace it all the way back to the goddess Venus herself. Now, okay, lots of aristocratic families made big claims.
Sure, standard practice.
But it gave him this incredibly powerful identity, rooted right in Rome's origin stories, its founding myths, really potent stuff.
But it wasn't just lineage. His early years, they seem to set a pattern, don't they? Ambition, yes, but also risk-taking, non-compliance.
Definitely. Take his marriage in 84 BC. He marries Cornelia. She's the daughter of Cinna, who was a major political rival of the current strongman, Sulla.
Right, Sulla the dictator. That must have put him in immediate danger.
Oh, absolutely. Sulla demanded he divorce her, flat out ordered him.
And Caesar.
He just refused, simply refused. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some minor domestic issue. It was a huge act of defiance against the guy in charge. A career-defining moment, really.
What were the consequences?
Sulla wasn't happy. He confiscated Caesar's property, his wife's dowry, his priestly income. Caesar basically had to flee, go into hiding, then eventually into military service out in the provinces, Asia and Cilicia.
Wow. So forced out.
Forced out. But that early rejection of the establishment, combined with his high birth, it let him position himself later, when he returned to Rome, as sort of a populist figure, someone who'd actually suffered under the old regime.
And he knew how to use public moments, didn't he? Spectacle seems key. I'm thinking about the funeral for his Aunt Julia.
Oh, absolutely masterful. Julia was the widow of Gaius Marius.
Sulla's great enemy.
The greatest enemy. And Marius's memory had been basically wiped clean, suppressed after Sulla won the Civil War. But at Julia's funeral, Caesar publicly displays the imagines. These are the wax death masks of ancestors.
Right, carried in processions.
Exactly. And he includes Marius's imago. This was incredibly bold, a calculated, high-stakes political gamble.
What was the message?
He was basically signaling, I'm willing to challenge the current conservative dominance. I'm invoking the memory of a popular hero, Sulla's enemy, loved by the people. It was about reconciliation politics, sure, but it was also pure defiance.
So he's building this public profile, using his family history, his defiance, these public spectacles. But, fame alone doesn't run Rome. He needed actual power, didn't he? Through the official channels, the curses honor him.
Indeed, the ladder of offices. And he climbed it pretty quickly, but it was expensive. Very expensive.
How so?
Well, in 69 BC, he gets the quaestorship. That was vital. They gave him a lifetime seat in the Senate, automatic entry.
Okay, a foot in the door.
Permanent foot in the door. Then, 63 BC was a big year. He gets elected praetor, a major judicial and military office. And crucially, he also gets elected Pontifex Maximus.
The chief priest. That sounds more religious than political.
It was, technically. But it carried immense status, enormous prestige. And it gave him religious authority that could, potentially influence legal stuff, set festival dates.
Yeah.
It was status and political leverage wrapped up in a religious cloak. Very useful.
But the sources seem pretty clear that even with these successes, he was drowning in debt by this point, just massively indebted.
Oh, dangerously so. It highlights something fundamental about Roman politics, really.
Which is?
Running for office, maintaining the necessary networks of clients and allies. It demanded huge amounts of personal spending, often way more than anyone actually had. Debt wasn't just a personal failing, it was almost a political tool, an investment.
So how do you pay it back?
Military command.
Yeah.
That was the tried and true way. Specifically, plunder from victorious campaigns. So, after his praetorship, he gets the governorship of Hispania Ulterior, basically southern Spain.
So not a retirement post.
Far from it, it was more like a financial rescue mission with an army attached. He needed victories, and he got them. Fought successful campaigns against local tribes, the Calesi and Lusitani.
He seized enough loot?
Enough to pay off his massive debts, yes. And his soldiers, importantly, hailed him Imperator on the battlefield, victorious commander. That title carried huge weight.
And that success brings him right back to Rome, facing a really tough choice, doesn't it? The consulship decision in 60 BC.
Yeah, classic political bind. He returns from Spain with the legal right to celebrate a triumph. You know, the massive victory parade through Rome, the absolute peak of public honor, dignitas.
Every general's dream.
Absolutely. But there's a catch. To stand for consul, the highest office, he had to give up his military command, his imperium, and cross the sacred city boundary, the pomerium, as a private citizen, a provides.
He couldn't be both general and candidate at the same time inside the city.
Exactly. And his enemies knew this. Cato the Younger, his biggest conservative opponent, deliberately blocked any attempt in the Senate to grant him an exemption to let him declare his candidacy in absentia.
So he had to choose triumph for consulship, spectacle, or power.
And he chose power. He gave up the triumph to stand for consul. That tells you a lot about his long-term thinking. He prioritized getting the actual office over the immediate, albeit huge, honor.
But even then, the conservatives didn't just roll over. He won the consulship for 59 BC, yes, but they managed to get their own man elected alongside him, didn't they? Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus.
His bitter enemy. A long-standing rival. And the clash was, well, immediate and intense.
What happened?
Caesar started pushing his legislative agenda. A key one was land reform, distributing public land in Campania to Pompey's veterans. Pompey was his ally at this point, and his soldiers desperately needed this settlement.
In Bibulus.
Bibulus and his conservative allies in the Senate tried everything to block him. Procedural delays, declaring bad omens, claiming religious days prohibited votes. The whole toolkit of obstruction.
Did it work?
Not really. Caesar kind of steamrolled them, sometimes using questionable tactics himself, maybe even mob intimidation, according to some sources. So Bibulus, in protest, basically, withdrew. He shut himself in his house for the rest of the year.
Stayed home. But he was still consul?
Yep. Stayed home, issuing edicts saying the omens were bad, trying to invalidate everything Caesar did, in an attempt to just shut down the government for the year.
Which led to that joke.
Exactly. The propagandist had a field day. People started dating documents not in the consulship of Caesar and Bibulus, but in the consulship of Julius and Caesar, implying Caesar was ruling alone.
So this whole episode, this conflict with Bibulus and Senate conservatives, it must have really pushed Caesar, right?
It absolutely convinced him, I think, that the traditional Republican system, with all its checks and balances and potential for obstruction, wasn't going to work for his ambitions. He needed power outside that system. He needed allies who could help him bypass the Senate.
Which brings us neatly to the First Triumvirate.
Exactly. This wasn't an official title, not yet anyway. It was an informal political alliance, forged around 60 BC, specifically to counter that senatorial obstruction.
Who was involved?
The three biggest players in Rome at the time. You had Caesar, the popular, ambitious politician needing clout. You had Crassus, reputedly the richest man in Rome who wanted political influence and maybe military glory. And you had Pompey the Great, the superstar general, who desperately needed the Senate to ratify his arrangements in the East and, crucially, give land to his veterans, the very thing Bibulus was blocking.
So they banded together out of mutual need.
Pretty much. They pooled their influence, their wealth, their political capital, and their popular support to essentially run Roman politics from behind the scenes, pushing through their agendas despite the fierce opposition from traditionalists like Cato and, to some extent, the orator Cicero. It was a power-sharing deal designed to break the deadlock.
Okay, so the triumvirate helped Caesar secure his consulship. And his reward, his proconsular command afterwards, was Gaul. the Gallic Wars, 58 to 51 BC. This wasn't just a standard military posting, was it? It became something much bigger.
Oh, far bigger. It was a multi-layered operation. Yes, it was a military command, initially for 5 years, that extended. But it was also a political shield, a financial engine, and a massive propaganda platform, all rolls into one.
Let's break that down. Political shield.
Well, while he held Imperium, military command, he was legally immune from prosecution in Rome. His enemies were already lining up charges against him for his actions during his consulship. Staying in Gaul with his army kept him safe.
Right. And the financial engine. We talked about his debts.
Exactly. Gaul was rich. The campaigns generated enormous wealth through plunder, selling captives into slavery. This funded his political activities back in Rome, kept his patronage networks running, paid off his remaining debts, and crucially paid his soldiers, ensuring their loyalty.
And then the propaganda aspect, this seems key.
Absolutely key. The scale of the campaigns was just vast. 8 full years of fighting, covering most of modern France, Belgium, parts of Germany, even brief expeditions to Britain.
Bringing huge territories under Roman control.
Huge. And culminating in that incredible victory at Alesia in 52 BC. That siege was, well, legendary. Caesar besieging the Gallic leader Vercingetorix inside the town, while simultaneously being besieged himself by a massive Gallic relief army from the outside, building fortifications facing both inwards and outwards.
A double siege. Incredible.
A logistical and tactical masterpiece. And success on that scale. It translated directly into immense political capital back in Rome. His fame, his dignitas soared, and that inevitably started to threaten the standing of his allies, especially Pompey, who was back in Rome trying to manage politics.
Did the Senate see the danger? This incredibly successful general with a loyal veteran army getting richer and more famous by the day.
Oh, they saw it. They were constantly trying to manage him, you could say. They debated ending his command early, cutting off funds. But his successes were so undeniable, they often had to publicly acknowledge them.
Like the Thanksgiving.
Exactly. The sources mentioned the Senate voting Caesar an unprecedented 15 days of supplicatio public thanksgiving after some early victories. Later, it was even extended. On one hand, it was honoring his achievements. On the other, maybe it was a way to sort of keep him happy, keep him popular, but also keep him out there in Gaul rather than bringing that massive prestige back to Rome too soon.
Trying to contain the whirlwind.
Something like that. But Caesar had another weapon, maybe his most powerful one during this period. Not his legions, but his pen. The commentaries.
His own account of the Gallic Wars.
De Bello Gallico. 10 books covering the campaigns year by year, and even at the time, people recognized them as a masterpiece of Latin prose. Clear, direct, precise, just brilliant writing.
But not exactly objective history, right?
Oh, not at all. They were intensely personal, highly selective, and brilliantly crafted pieces of political propaganda. They served multiple purposes all at once. Well, first, keeping his name front and center in Rome, constantly reminding people of his victories, his service to the state. Second, justifying the campaigns themselves, presenting them as necessary defensive actions, bringing civilization to barbarians, profitable for Rome.
And maybe most importantly,
Preemptive legal and political defense. He knew prosecution awaited him if he ever returned to Rome without his command. The commentaries laid out his case, presenting his actions as lawful, necessary, and successful. It was basically him writing the first draft of history, ensuring his version got out there first.
It's incredible manufacturing your own narrative while you're still living it. But even that couldn't hold the triumvirate together indefinitely. What finally caused it to break down?
A couple of key things. First, Crassus, the third member, the money man, was killed disastrously campaigning against the Parthians in 53 BC. That removed one leg of the stool.
Okay.
Then, perhaps more critically on a personal level, Caesar's daughter Julia, who was Pompey's wife, died in childbirth in 54 BC. That marriage had been a key political bond between the two men.
So the personal link was gone.
The personal link? And one of the original power brokers. Without those ties, the underlying rivalry and mistrust between Caesar and Pompey, which had always been there, just came bubbling to the surface between 52 and 49 BC. Pompey started aligning more closely with the conservative faction in the Senate, the Optimates.
The very people Caesar had allied with Pompey against.
Exactly. The political landscape shifted dramatically, and the Senate conservatives, led by hardliners like Cato, saw their chance to finally bring Caesar down.
So what was the final straw? What did the Senate actually demand?
They issued an ultimatum, essentially. They demanded that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, a providus, before he could stand for his planned second consulship.
which would leave him completely vulnerable to prosecution.
Precisely. It would mean the end of his political career, possibly exile or worse. Caesar knew this. He counteroffered, proposing that both he and Pompey disband their armies simultaneously, or that he be allowed to keep just a small part of his command until his consular election.
Trying to find a compromise.
Maybe. Or maybe just stalling, showing he was willing to negotiate. But the hardliners in the Senate, now backed by Pompey, refused. They passed the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, basically martial law, empowering Pompey to defend the Republic against Caesar.
So Caesar was backed into a corner, political ruin, or
war. And he chose war. In early January 49 BC, he led one of his legions, the 13th, across the Rubicon River,
the boundary of his province.
the legal boundary between his province of Cisalpine Gaul and Italy proper. By bringing troops under arms into Italy, he was committing an act of treason, an act of war against the Roman state. There's no going back.
Wait a second, though. The sources, often influenced by Caesar's own account, say he crossed the Rubicon to protect the rights of the tribunes, right? Mark Antony and another tribune had vetoed the Senate's decree against him and then fled to his camp.
Yes, that was his official justification. He claimed the Senate had violated the sanctity of the tribunes, the people's representatives, and that he was acting to uphold the Constitution and popular rights. A very clever piece of political framing.
But was it genuine? Or just a convenient excuse?
Well, that's the million drachma question, isn't it? It certainly gave him a legalistic fig leaf.
Right.
But consider what happened almost immediately after he secured Italy. He needed funds.
Right.
Desperately.
Right. War is expensive.
Extremely. So he marched on Rome, and when the remaining tribune tried to veto his access to the state treasury held in the Temple of Saturn, Caesar just ignored the veto. He forcibly broke open the treasury and took the money.
So much for protecting the tribune's veto power.
Exactly. He kind of exposed the protecting the tribune's line as, well, perhaps more of a pretext than a deeply held principle at that moment. His primary goal seems pretty clear. Seize control, defeat his enemies. The legal justifications were useful tools, but perhaps secondary to the raw power politics playing out. Once the Rubicon was crossed, things moved incredibly fast. Caesar's speed, his celeritas was legendary. It caught Pompey and the Senate completely off guard.
They weren't ready for a winter campaign.
Not at all. Pompey and most of the senators loyal to him basically abandoned Italy, fleeing across the Adriatic Sea to Greece to regroup and raise an army. Caesar secured Italy incredibly quickly.
But Pompey still had forces elsewhere.
Yes, powerful legions loyal to him in Spain. So Caesar made a lightning campaign there first. I went to fight an army without a general, he supposedly said, and returned to fight a general without an army. He defeated Pompey's legates in Spain, then sailed east to confront Pompey himself.
Leading to the big showdown.
The decisive Battle of Pharsalus in Greece in 48 BC. Caesar was outnumbered, but his veteran legions were just better. He crushed Pompey's army, a total victory.
And Pompey, what happened to him?
He fled the battlefield seeking refuge in Egypt. Egypt was technically an independent kingdom, but very much under Roman influence, a client state. He probably thought he'd be safe there.
But he wasn't.
No. The advisors to the young Pharaoh Ptolemy III decided that harboring Pompey was too risky. It would mean choosing a side in the Roman Civil War. So as Pompey stepped ashore, he was assassinated, stabbed to death.
Brutal. And Caesar arrived soon after.
Just a few days later, in October 48 BC, he sails into Alexandria, supposedly expecting to deal with Pompey, when he's presented with Pompey's severed head. Well, the sources say he feigned outrage, or maybe it was genuine shock at the murder of a Roman consul, even his enemy.
And he gets involved in Egyptian politics.
Right into the middle of it. There was already a civil war brewing in Egypt between the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII and his older sister, wife, and co-ruler Cleopatra VII. Caesar took it upon himself to arbitrate.
Which led to the famous Alexandrian War, and of course his relationship with Cleopatra. Was this just a distraction, or did it serve a strategic purpose?
Oh, it was deeply strategic, massively so. Forget the romance for a second, think geopolitics. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, the single most important source of grain for Rome.
Controlling Egypt meant controlling Rome's food supply.
Exactly. By intervening in the civil war, defeating Ptolemy XIII's forces, Ptolemy himself drowned in the Nile, and firmly installing Cleopatra on the throne, Caesar secured that vital grain supply for Rome. He neutralized a massive potential vulnerability.
And the affair with Cleopatra and their son, Caesarion.
That cemented the relationship. It created a personal and political tie between Rome's strongman and the ruler of its most vital client kingdom. Caesarion, born in 47 BC, represented a potential dynastic link, though Caesar never formally acknowledged him in Rome. So no, his stay in Egypt wasn't just a detour. It was a crucial geopolitical power play, disguised perhaps by romance.
Okay, so Egypt's secured. But the civil war wasn't over yet, was it? There were still Republican forces resisting him.
Absolutely. The die-hard Republicans, the ones who refused to accept Caesar's dominance, regrouped. They were resilient. Caesar had to keep campaigning.
Where were the main pockets of resistance?
First, in North Africa. He fought the Battle of Thapsus in 46 BC, a decisive victory against the remaining Pompeian senators and their allies. This is where his staunchest opponent, Cato the Younger, famously committed suicide in nearby Utica rather than accept Caesar's pardon. He refused to live in a world dominated by Caesar.
A dramatic end for a stoic figure.
Indeed. Then the final resistance flared up in Spain, led by Pompey's sons. This led to the last major battle of the Civil War, the Battle of Munda in March 45 BC.
How did that go?
It was apparently incredibly brutal, one of the hardest fought battles of Caesar's career. He supposedly said he often fought for victory, but at Munda, he fought for his life. He won, narrowly. But the sources note a shift in his attitude. He treated the defeated Romans not as honorable opponents, but as rebels. There were massacres after the battle, a grim sign, perhaps, of his rule hardening.
So finally, undisputed master of the Roman world. He returns to Rome in late 45 BC. What happens then?
Triumphs. Yes, a series of incredibly lavish triumphs, celebrating his victories over Gaul, Egypt, Pontus after a quick campaign there, and Africa. But significantly, he also implicitly celebrated his victory in Spain over fellow Romans.
Which was controversial.
Highly controversial. Traditionally, triumphs were only for victories over foreign enemies. Celebrating a victory in a civil war was seen as, well, unseemly, as the sources put it, bad form. But Caesar did it anyway.
Why? What was the message?
The message was clear. I am the absolute victor. My authority is total. He wasn't just a general serving a republic anymore, he was the state, in effect. He was operating with basically unchallenged power. He already held the title of dictator several times, usually for short, constitutionally limited periods. But now his power wasn't really based on the office anymore. It stemmed from his personal status, his military backing, his immense wealth and influence. The traditional offices were becoming just honors, reflecting his ultimate authority.
And he used that authority to push through some major reforms, didn't he? He wasn't just about conquest, he was an administrator, a reformer.
A revolutionary one, in many ways. His reforms touched fundamental aspects of Roman life and governance.
Like the calendar, that seems like a big one.
The Julian calendar, yes. The old Roman calendar was a lunisolar mess. It constantly drifted out of sync with the seasons, and worse, the pontifices, the priests in charge, could manipulate it for political gain. They could shorten or lengthen months to affect election dates or magistrates' terms in office.
So it was unreliable and corruptible.
Completely. Caesar, using his authority as Pontifex Maximus, brought in Egyptian astronomers and fundamentally reformed it. Introduced the solar year of 365.25 days, the leap year system, essentially the basis of the calendar we still use today. He literally took control of time, wresting it away from the old priestly elite. A massive assertion of control.
What about other areas, economic, social reform?
He tackled some huge issues. Debt was a chronic problem. He enacted measures for debt relief, trying to find a balance between helping debtors without completely crashing the credit system. Very complex. He also reduced the numbers dependent on the grain dole in Rome, the free grain distribution, partly by settling huge numbers of people elsewhere. Massive colonization programs. Tens of thousands of his veterans and many urban poor were settled in new colonies founded across the Mediterranean, in places like Gaul, Spain, North Africa, Greece.
What was the goal there? Just relieving poverty?
Partly that, yes, but also rewarding his loyal soldiers with land, spreading Roman influence and culture, and importantly, reducing the potentially restless urban population in Rome itself. And of course, ensuring the loyalty of these new communities to him personally.
And the Senate. He made changes there too, significant ones.
He dramatically increased its size. Traditionally around 600 members, he swelled it to 900.
Why do that? Just packing it with his supporters?
That was definitely part of it. He brought in hundreds of his loyalists, senators, equestrians, even some prominent figures from the Italian provinces and Gaul, which horrified the old Roman aristocracy. They saw these newcomers as unqualified outsiders.
So, rewarding followers?
Yeah.
But was there a deeper strategy?
Oh, absolutely. By making the Senate so large and diverse, packed with men personally loyal to him, he effectively diluted the power of the old conservative faction. It became a much less effective body for organizing opposition or challenging his authority decision-making power inevitably shifted away from the Senate floor and concentrated even more firmly in his own hands. It was a strategic move to neutralize the traditional center of aristocratic power.
But all these moves of triumphs over Romans, the calendar reform, packing the Senate, they all point towards increasing personal dominance. What was the absolute tipping point, the moment that really sealed his fate?
That almost certainly came in early 44 BC. He was appointed, or perhaps more accurately, declared dictator perpetuo, dictator for life.
How is that different from previous dictatorships?
In Roman tradition, a dictator was an emergency office, appointed only in times of extreme crisis, typically for just 6 months, with absolute power to fix the problem and then step down. That was the ideal. By accepting the dictatorship for life, Caesar shattered that tradition. He essentially signaled that the crisis was permanent, or rather, that his rule was permanent. It ended any real illusion that the old republic, with its elected magistrates and term limits, would ever be fully restored.
So, effectively, king in all but name.
That's exactly how his opponents saw it. He was careful to publicly refuse the title Rex, king, when it was offered, but the lifetime dictatorship? That looked awfully monarchical to Romans, steeped in centuries of tradition that defined itself against kingship. And he reinforced this impression in other ways too, like putting his own portrait on coins circulating within Rome while he was still alive.
That hadn't been done before.
Not for living Romans. Gods, yes, dead ancestors maybe, but a living individual. That was seen as distinctly monarchical, a Hellenistic practice, not a Republican one. It was another clear visual statement. I am different. I am above the old rules. So that move, the dictator perpetuo, it really was the final straw for many in the Senate. It wasn't just about Caesar being successful or popular anymore. It was about the fundamental change to the state.
The fear was kingship, wasn't it? That he'd eventually just take the title, Rex.
Exactly. For a significant faction of senators, particularly those with strong Republican ideals, steeped in the traditions of shared power and aristocratic rule, the idea of a permanent, unaccountable ruler was intolerable. It conjured up images of the ancient kings Rome had overthrown centuries before. Tyranny, oppression.
And Caesar didn't help his own case just before the end, did he? There was that incident with the tribunes.
A critical political blunder, looking back. In January or February of 44 BC, there were these incidents. Someone placed a diadem, a royal headband, on his statue. At the Lupercalia festival, Mark Antony publicly offered him a diadem, which Caesar refused.
Testing the waters, maybe? Seeing how the crowd reacted?
Possibly. But the key thing was the reaction of 2 tribunes of the plebs, the elected protectors of the common people. They actively intervened, removed the diadem from the statue, and arrested the person who first placed it there. They were doing their job, upholding Republican tradition against perceived monarchical symbols.
And Caesar's response?
He was furious. He convened the Senate and had those 2 tribunes stripped of their office and expelled from the Senate.
Wow. That seems self-destructive.
It was astonishingly counterproductive. His entire justification for starting the Civil War, remember, was supposedly to protect the rights and sanctity of the tribunes whose veto had been ignored. Now here he was, deposing tribunes for doing their duty. It completely undermined his populist credentials and alienated many who might have otherwise supported him, or at least tolerated his rule. It made him look like he only cared about tribunes when they served his purposes.
So the political climate was just ripe for conspiracy.
Perfectly ripe. And the conspiracy formed, led primarily by Gaius Cassius Longinus, a senator who had fought against Caesar but been pardoned, and Marcus Junius Brutus.
Brutus, Caesar's friend. Perhaps even, some speculated, his illegitimate son.
Yes, the relationship was close, which made the betrayal all the more shocking. Brutus came from a lineage deeply associated with overthrowing Rome's last king. He was seen as a man of high principle. Cassius was perhaps more pragmatic, maybe driven more by personal animosity or frustrated ambition. Together they recruited perhaps 60 or more senators.
And they framed the act how?
As tyrannicide, as political liberation. They saw themselves not as murderers, but as patriots acting like Brutus's ancestor to restore liberty to Rome by removing a man who had grown too powerful. And they had a deadline, didn't they?
They did. Caesar was planning to leave Rome just 3 days after the Ides of March, on March 18th, for a massive military campaign against the Parthian Empire in the east.
A campaign that might bring him even more glory, more power.
Exactly. So the conspirators knew they had to act before he left. Their window was closing fast. They chose the Senate meeting scheduled for the Ides of March 15th, held not in the usual Senate house, but in a meeting room attached to the theater of Pompey.
The irony. killed at the foot of his great rival's statue.
The symbolism is potent, and the drama leading up to that moment, the warnings Caesar supposedly received, it's incredible.
The sources are filled with omens and portents. His wife, Calphurnia, reportedly had terrible nightmares the night before, begging him not to go to the Senate. There was the famous soothsayer, Spurina, who had apparently warned Caesar weeks before to beware the Ides of March.
And the letter.
Yes, Artemidorus, a Greek teacher who supposedly knew about the plot. He tried to hand Caesar a scroll on his way to the Senate, explicitly naming the conspirators and warning him of the danger, urging him to read it immediately. Caesar apparently took it but didn't read it, distracted by the crowds.
So many chances to turn back. Why did he go?
It seems one of the conspirators themselves played a key role. Decius Brutus, not Marcus Brutus. He was part of Caesar's inner circle. When Caesar seemed hesitant that morning, possibly because of Calphurnia's fears or the ill omens, Decius went to his house.
And persuaded him.
Yes. According to the accounts, he reinterpreted Calphurnia's dream in a positive light. But more effectively, he appealed to Caesar's pride and perhaps his political calculation. He apparently warned Caesar that the Senate was planning to officially offer him the title of king that day, outside Italy perhaps, and if he didn't show up, he'd look weak, superstitious, disrespectful to the Senate. That seemed to do the trick. Caesar went.
And walked into the trap, the assassination itself, stabbed repeatedly.
Attacked by a group of senators near the statue of Pompey. He received, according to reports, 23 stab wounds.
And the last words? Et tu, Brute. You too, Brutus. Is that historically accurate?
It's famous, immortalized by Shakespeare, but its historical basis is shaky. The Roman historian Suetonius mentions reports that he said nothing, just pulled his toga over his head. He does report another version, though, that Caesar might have said in Greek, Kaisu tenon, you too, child, directed at Marcus Brutus. But honestly, we don't know for sure what, if anything, he said. The power of the phrase, whether Latin or Greek, lies in capturing that ultimate sense of betrayal by someone he trusted, someone like Brutus.
Regardless of the words, the act itself was done. What happened immediately after? Did the conspirators have a plan?
They seemed to understand the symbolic weight of their actions. They didn't flee immediately. Instead, they dipped their hands in daggers in Caesar's blood, a ritualistic act, and emerged, holding up their bloody weapons, shouting, "Liberty! Freedom! Tyranny is dead!" They were making a public statement. Some sources even have them wondering aloud how many centuries later this lofty scene would be reenacted. They saw it as a foundational moment for a restored republic.
A noble sacrifice for the state, in their eyes.
That was the narrative they wanted to project. But they seem to have completely misjudged the political reality on the ground, and they made a critical mistake.
Which was?
Sparing Mark Antony. Cassius apparently argued they should kill Antony too, seeing him as Caesar's powerful lieutenant and a likely source of trouble. But Brutus, wanting the act to be seen purely as tyrannicide, not a political purge or bloodbath, overruled him. They let Antony live.
And Antony didn't just sit quietly.
Not at all. Antony was consul that year, Caesar's co-consul. After the initial shock and confusion, he acted incredibly shrewdly. He didn't immediately call for vengeance. Instead, he negotiated a compromise with the Senate.
What was the deal?
Essentially, amnesty for the assassins, they wouldn't be prosecuted. But crucially, Caesar's acts and laws would remain valid. He wouldn't be declared a tyrant posthumously. This was vital, as it meant all his appointments, land grants, etc. still stood, preventing chaos. And as part of this deal, Antony secured permission for Caesar to have a public funeral.
The funeral, that turned out to be the key moment, didn't it? Antony's speech.
Antony's funeral oration was a masterpiece of political manipulation, whether it happened exactly as Shakespeare wrote it or not. The core elements reported by historians are powerful enough. He didn't directly attack the conspirators at first. Remember, they had amnesty. He started by acknowledging their honorable intentions, maybe ironically. But then he presented Caesar's body, showed the crowd the wounds, the torn and bloody toga, let the visual evidence of the violence speak for itself. He reminded them of Caesar's victories, his generosity.
And the will. He read Caesar's will, didn't he?
That was the killer blow, the political masterstroke. He revealed that Caesar, this supposed tyrant aiming for personal power, had left a substantial sum of money, 75 drachmas, to every single Roman citizen in his will.
Wow.
And perhaps even more powerfully, he had bequeathed his vast private gardens and estates across the Tiber River to the people of Rome forever, as public parks, common pleasures.
That completely undercut the selfish tyrant narrative. He'd left his legacy to the people.
Utterly demolished it. The mood of the crowd swung violently. Grief turned to fury against the assassins. Riots broke out. The carefully laid plans of Brutus and Cassius just evaporated in the face of popular rage, skillfully stoked by Antony.
And the consequences were immediate.
Immediate and brutal. Mobs attacked the homes of the conspirators. Brutus and Cassius were forced to flee Rome, their hopes of being hailed as liberators dashed. And then there's that chilling story of Cinna the poet.
Right, killed by mistake.
Hunted down and torn apart by the mob simply because he had the same name as one of the conspirators, Lucius Cornelius Cinna. It just shows the sheer fury and chaos Antony unleashed. The Republic wasn't restored. It had descended into mob rule and the beginnings of a new civil war. Looking at the motivations, especially through the lens of drama like Shakespeare's play, which obviously draws on historical sources like Plutarch, we can really see a fascinating clash of philosophies underpinning the conspiracy, particularly between the two main leaders, Cassius and Brutus.
Right, they seem to approach from very different angles. Let's start with Cassius. He's often associated with Epicureanism.
That's a common interpretation, yeah. Epicureanism, at its core, aimed for ataraxia, a state of tranquility, free from fear and pain. It emphasized rational thought and, importantly, free will. It tended to downplay or reject fate and superstition.
And how does that fit Cassius?
Well, he's portrayed as pragmatic, sharp, observant, maybe a bit cynical. He seems to organize the conspiracy out of a belief that people must act to change their circumstances, not wait for fate. Think of his famous line to Brutus. "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings." That's pure emphasis on human agency over destiny.
Take matters into your own hands.
Exactly. He sees Caesar's dominance as something that needs to be actively resisted, not passively accepted. He's driven by a kind of self-sufficient rationalism, less about abstract ideals perhaps, and more about the practical reality of removing a perceived obstacle to freedom, or maybe even his own ambition.
Caesar himself seemed wary of him, didn't he? That lean and hungry look comment.
Yeah, Caesar supposedly preferred fat, sleek-headed men around him, men who slept at night. Cassius thinks too much, Caesar says. Such men are dangerous. He recognized this sharp, analytical, perhaps detached quality, often linked to Epicurean thought, someone less swayed by spectacle and emotion.
Okay, so Cassius the pragmatist, maybe the Epicurean. What about Brutus? He's the archetypal Stoic, isn't he?
Very much so. Stoicism was almost the opposite in many ways. The highest goal wasn't tranquility, but living in accordance with virtue, with logos or reason. Honor, duty, self-control, putting the good of the state above personal feelings, these were paramount.
And Brutus really seems to embody that struggle.
He agonizes over the decision. He genuinely loves Caesar personally. He acknowledges that. But he convinces himself, through rational deliberation, a key Stoic practice, that Caesar's ambition poses an existential threat to the Republic. Therefore, for the general good, for the sake of liberty and Roman virtue, Caesar must be killed. It's presented as a painful duty, an intellectual decision overriding personal affection.
A sacrifice of personal feeling for public virtue.
Precisely. But that very Stoic commitment to acting purely for virtuous reasons, untainted by base motives like revenge or political expediency, that arguably becomes his fatal flaw, politically speaking.
How so? Connect that philosophy to the aftermath, specifically the decision about Antony.
Well, remember, Cassius wanted Antony killed alongside Caesar. Practical politics removed the biggest potential threat. But Brutus refused. Why? Because in his Stoic framework, their act had to be pure, a surgical strike against tyranny itself, not a bloody political purge. Killing Antony would make it look like a mere power grab, a factional dispute.
He wanted it to be seen as a sacrifice, not a slaughter.
Exactly. He says something like, let's be sacrificers but not butchers. He wanted to preserve the moral high ground. So he not only spares Antony, but makes the catastrophic decision to allow Antony to speak at Caesar's funeral.
Believing Antony could be managed, or that the righteousness of their cause would win out.
Probably a bit of both. A belief in the power of reason and truth, perhaps. But it was a disastrous miscalculation based on principle rather than political reality. Antony, the skilled politician and orator, used that opportunity to destroy them. Brutus's Stoic idealism in that crucial moment proved utterly ineffective against Antony's ruthless pragmatism.
So the assassination, meant to restore the Republic, instead triggers its final collapse.
Immediately. Any hope of a peaceful return to the old ways vanished. The power vacuum wasn't filled by the Senate, it was filled by Caesar's avengers.
Which led to the Second Triumvirate?
Yes, Mark Antony teamed up with Caesar's designated heir, his young great-nephew Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, and a less powerful general, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. They formed an official, legally constituted triumvirate with powers to rule the state.
And their first order of business?
Revenge and consolidation of power. They unleashed a brutal wave of prescriptions, basically legal hit lists. Hundreds of senators and wealthy equestrians deemed enemies of the state were condemned, their property confiscated, often executed without trial.
Including Cicero, the great orator.
Yes. Cicero was high on Antony's list. He had delivered a series of scathing speeches against Antony the Philippics. Antony had him hunted down and killed. His head and hands were displayed publicly in the Roman Forum. A chilling message.
And even within the triumvirate, there was tension. Antony and Lepidus.
Oh yeah. Antony in particular seems to have held Lepidus in contempt. Shakespeare captures this, based on historical sources, portraying Antony dismissing Lepidus as a slight, unmeritable man, meet to be sent on errands, useful only as a tool to bear burdens, someone to be discarded later. The alliance was one of convenience, riddled with internal rivalries from the start.
So this new triumvirate then turned its attention to the assassins Brutus and Cassius,
who had fled east and raised substantial armies of their own. The final confrontation came in Greece, at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. Actually, 2 battles over a few weeks.
And how did that end?
Decisively. The triumvirate's forces, commanded mainly by Antony and Octavian, defeated the Republicans. Cassius, in the first battle, mistakenly believing Brutus's wing had been defeated and all was lost, ordered his servant to kill him.
Based on bad information?
Apparently so. A tragic end driven by battlefield confusion. Brutus won his part of the first engagement but couldn't sustain the campaign. He was defeated in the second battle a few weeks later.
And his end?
Seeing that the cause was truly lost, he committed suicide, famously invoking Caesar. "O Julius Caesar, thou art mighty yet. Thy spirit walks abroad and turns our swords in our own proper entrails." He recognized in a way that Caesar's legacy, his influence, had ultimately triumphed over their attempt to erase him. The assassination had unleashed forces that destroyed them and the republic they claimed to save.
So Philippi marks the real end of the Republican resistance.
Pretty much the final nail in the coffin. From there, the triumvirate controlled Rome, though their own rivalries would soon tear them apart, leading to yet another civil war, this time between Antony and Octavian.
Which Octavian eventually won, becoming Augustus the first emperor.
Exactly. He cleverly maintained the forms of the republic. The Senate still met. Consuls were elected, but the real power rested solely with him. A masked autocracy, as some call it. The republic was dead, replaced by the empire.
And Caesar's own status in this new order.
Crucial to Octavian's legitimacy. Even before Philippi, on January 1st, 42 BC, the Senate, under pressure from the triumvirs, had formally deified Julius Caesar. He became Divus Iulius, the divine Julius.
Picking Octavian.
Divi Filius, son of the god. An incredibly powerful title, blending political inheritance with divine sanction. It was a cornerstone of Augustus's authority, and Caesar's name itself, his cognomen, took on a life of its own.
Becoming synonymous with emperor.
Right. It was adopted by subsequent Roman emperors, and that usage echoed down through centuries, giving us titles like Kaiser in Germany and Tsar in Russia. The name itself became a symbol of ultimate authority.
Before we completely leave Caesar the man, the sources give us little glimpses, don't they? Physical descriptions, health issues.
They do, though often filtered through later accounts or political bias. He's generally described as tall for a Roman, fair-skinned, with keen, dark eyes. Apparently quite concerned about his appearance, especially his receding hairline, hence the laurel wreath he often wore, perhaps partly for vanity.
And his health. There are stories about epilepsy or something similar?
Yes, ancient sources mentioned episodes of what they might have called morbus commiscialis, the falling sickness. Modern interpretations vary wildly. Epilepsy is possible. Some suggest recurring bouts of malaria, which was endemic. Others propose transient ischemic attacks, TIAs, or mini-strokes, perhaps linked to potential cerebrovascular issues that might have run in his family. We just don't know for sure.
And personal attacks. Rumors.
Oh, Roman politics was rife with personal slander. Caesar faced persistent rumors, especially early in his career, about alleged passive homosexuality, particularly concerning his time as a young envoy at the court of King Nicomedes of Bithynia. These were standard political smears used by opponents like Cicero, Bibulus, and others to try and undermine his dignitas, paint him as effeminate or morally compromised in Roman eyes. He always vehemently denied them. Tells you more about Roman political invective than about Caesar's actual private life, probably. Hashtag tag outro. So when we really dive deep, what emerges is this picture of Caesar's political genius, right? It lay in this uncanny ability he had to essentially fuse his own personal ambition, his success, his power, with what he presented as the good of Rome itself. His reforms were genuinely transformative. Many lasted for centuries. But that very dominance, the way he concentrated power in himself, completely alienated the traditional Republican elite. It forced this confrontation, this clash, that ultimately didn't save the Republic, as the assassins hoped, but guaranteed its destruction. It destroyed the very system they were trying to preserve.
Yeah, the irony is just staggering, isn't it? The Ides of March, an act carried out explicitly in the name of liberty to prevent a king. And yet, Caesar's death didn't restore the Republic. It unleashed chaos and ultimately cemented the rule of a single unchallenged leader, his own chosen heir, Octavian.
The law of unintended consequences, writ large across history.
Absolutely. So maybe here's a final thought for you listening. We live today in an age just saturated with information, constantly bombarded by narratives from powerful leaders from various sources. How do we, as the audience, make that critical distinction? How do we separate the complex, often messy political reality of leaders' actions from the story they tell about those actions? Whether that story comes through, a brilliantly written but self-serving war commentary designed to justify actions and dodge prosecution.
That's Caesar's commentaries.
Or through a powerful, enduring theatrical tragedy like Shakespeare's, designed to explore profound questions about ambition, betrayal, and human nature. Disentangling the historical fact from the constructed narrative, maybe that's Caesar's most enduring challenge, not just to historians, but to all of us trying to understand power and politics then and now.